It's nice to think she won't be around. For a while, my youngest brother was getting married, and I was busy getting ready for an overnight stay I even took. Paid time off from work to leave our home where I live with my in-laws. It's been a while since I did that. I was packing my overnight bag for this celebration when I heard my mother-in-law's voice behind me. Never. Come back, and while you're at it, why don't you just get a divorce and leave? She said, sure, as you wish. I responded calmly and accepted her, spite with a quiet smile, leaving her sneering taunts behind. I stepped out of the house. Before I got too far, I said, goodbye to our home. Thank you for everything. It's been a long time. I don't remember ever being looked after by my mother-in-law. But somehow I felt very lighthearted. I pulled along a slightly oversized suitcase, rushing to where my beloved family awaited. I'll be staying at the hotel for 3 nights and 4 days. What comes after that remains a secret. My mother-in-law doesn't know that I will never return as a resident of this house. I'm Michelle Williams, 53-year-old part-timer. While working at an office, I also manage our busy household. My husband Daniel and I are the same age, and our marriage has lasted over 31 years. It was an arranged meeting, recommended by an acquaintance, but we're a couple who share similar values and get along well. The only loneliness comes from Daniel's job. As a sailor, he works for a shipping company and can be away from home for over a year at times. Still, our relationship is good, and we are blessed with a son. We live in a house with my in-laws. Until recently, I was mainly responsible for taking care of my husband's grandmother, who lived with us. I used my income to hire a caregiver during the day, and after that I took care of her mostly by myself. This went on until my grandmother-in-law passed away. Michelle, thank you for everything over the years. Grandma must have been happy too. She was grateful to you until the end, Daniel said, his kind words bringing tears to my eyes. Surrounded by children to great grandchildren, my grandmother-in-law was well cared for in her younger days. When I was new to household tasks, she taught me how to live properly. She was kind and fun, though strict at times, and seemed to laugh most of the time. Thanks to her, I could keep my job for my younger days and work part-time even during caregiving. Despite caregiving being a significant burden, now that it's over, I find myself cherishing those days with nostalgia. I never imagined that the environment around me would change so drastically right after that. Daniel, due to his job on the ship, often has to be away from home for long periods. I'm proud of him for his important work in American logistics, but living with my in-laws puts me at a disadvantage. The moment my grandmother-in-law passed away, my mother-in-law's attitude changed dramatically. Previously, she would try to appease me with sweet talk while dumping all the caregiving responsibilities on me, but as soon as the caregiving ended, she began to disregard me. When she went out, she would deliberately exclude me from the souvenir, and when we passed each other in the house, she would bump into me on purpose. Her overly hostile behavior was so shocking that I couldn't help but be surprised before feeling disgusted. Moreover, my son Adam, who happened to be visiting, said something to me. Hey, Grandma, started saying nasty things again. It's an old story, but when Adam was just 5 or 6 years old, there was a significant incident with my mother-in-law. She filled Adam with baseless accusations against me, and upset Adam reported this to the whole family. Your mom is cheating. She's going to leave you eventually. That woman is no good. She doesn't work, and she's all bad. Your dad hates her too. That's why he doesn't come home. You got that? I was shocked to learn she had been teaching him such lies. I wasn't cheating, and despite working every day and doing household chores, I was truly busy Moreover, the reason Daniel was absent was genuinely because of work that's such a joke it's ridiculous to take it seriously anyway. Such a small kid won't understand anything. My mother-in-law sulked and my father-in-law was also furious about it. I was too busy comforting a sad Adam to worry about anything else. Later, when Daniel came home, I felt relieved as he changed his demeanor and scolded my mother-in-law. Now let's return to the present. Daniel is currently away for work. Maybe because of that, my mother-in-law seems to be taking full advantage. You'd think she'd have more free time now that the caregiving is over, but instead she keeps me very busy. She frequently hands me complicated recipes to cook and demands a thorough cleaning. Just the other day, she invited the neighborhood ladies over, and they watched a marathon of dramas. I thought they were just enjoying themselves, but I ended up having to clean up the messy room full of snack wrappers and drink spills right during the busiest time. Before dinner, it added unnecessary work, and I was understandably irritated. Really, you're such a drag, aren't you done yet? Hurry up and get dinner ready, she'd say while I was sweating from cleaning up. But come dinner time, she wouldn't even sit at the table, claiming she was full from the snacks. I was utterly exasperated. Then Adam complained to me. She says she doesn't like you and that you should disappear. I'm going back home. I feel sick. Wouldn't it be better if we lived separately from Grandma? I think Dad would understand too. I calmed down and upset Adam and drove him to the station for his return trip. Of course, I couldn't let things continue like this. Soon I'll need to have a serious talk with Daniel. The day after Adam left, I was troubled not by my mother-in-law, but by something else. Suddenly I started feeling unwell. My limbs were cold, yet my face would suddenly heat up, and I'd break out in a sweat. It seems like today my symptoms of menopause were particularly severe. I've been feeling oddly unwell since last year, and the doctors told me it's menopause right now. They're just watching how it goes with no medication. Yeah, but some days can be tough. Maybe the stress from what I heard about my mother-in-law's behavior is getting to me. By evening, my condition worsened, and I was lying down in my room. Hey, what are you sleeping for dinner? I could hear my mother-in-law stomping towards me. I had such a headache that it was hard to even get up, let alone deal with her. I thought about pretending to be asleep, but she suddenly yanked off the blanket, and I reluctantly sat up. Dinner. She clapped her hands as she demanded dinner. If she wants dinner, she should make it herself. Why does she always expect me to do it? As if she's someone special. My grandmother-in-law used to manage the kitchen, but lately it's only been me cooking. My mother-in-law only steps into the kitchen when Daniel is home, and even then she barely does more than arrange the plates. Maybe she can't cook at all. I feeling unwell. I think it's menopause, but I really can't do the housework today. Please, can you make dinner today? I managed to say, feeling utterly tired. My mother-in-law had severe menopause symptoms herself. I had already moved in with them and had my fair share of her snapping at me, so there's no doubt about it. I thought she'd understand the pain if I mentioned it was menopause. However, her reaction was the exact opposite of what I had hoped for. With a snort, she suddenly turned a bag over my head. What I let out a small scream as something showered down on me in the dim room. Just waking from sleep and feeling sick, I couldn't tell what it was at first. A moment later, I realized it was the smell of potatoes. The bag she turned upside down was nearly empty, but she had sprinkled me with snack crumbs. The sheer unexpectedness of it left me dumbfounded for a moment. Don't be lazy, she said with a click of her tongue, and then left the room. Here I was bedridden and in pain, being yelled at. I almost felt like clicking my tongue back at her. How could she do something like this? Rather than anger, it was a bizarre sensation like seeing some rare animal I felt sure that my limit was nearing. About half a year later, I had taken some paid leave from work and was preparing for a trip. It was for my younger brother's wedding. He had been living with his girlfriend for a few years, and they were finally tying the knot. Their home is in Michigan, and they wanted to have the wedding there since it's quite far from here. I booked a hotel for a 3-night, 4-day stay. I decided to take the trip and participate overnight. My younger brother offered to cover the hotel costs, but I declined since the date of the ceremony was set according to my schedule. I wanted to pay for it myself. It's a small ceremony with just the family, but it's a rare opportunity for all the relatives to gather, so I'm looking forward to it. Since nobody else would likely prepare meals in my absence, I decided to make a week's worth of meals in advance. The night before leaving, while we were eating dinner, I told my in-laws about the meals I prepared and stored in the fridge. My father-in-law thanked me, but as usual, my mother-in-law seemed displeased with everything about me. Why are you even going to your brother's wedding? It's just a remarriage, isn't it? Probably nothing good, she said with a frown, and my father-in-law glared at her. Actually, both my brother and his partner are marrying for the first time, I replied. My mother-in-law burst out laughing with a rude expression. First marriage at 41, there must be something seriously wrong with him to be single that long. Your brother's at a good age, yet he's having a flashy wedding. Shameless. She seemed to be confusing him with another brother, or had completely forgotten about my family structure. In fact, I have 3 brothers. The youngest brother and I have a 15-year age gap, so he's still quite young. No, it's my youngest brother who's getting married. He's in his early 33s and his partner is in her 24s, I explained, shrugging. My mother-in-law raised her eyebrows, offended by the correction, but soon twisted her face into a sneer again. How creepy. His partner is 24. That's like a parent and child, she said. I was astonished at her refusal to listen this time. Even my father-in-law seemed to realize the mistake, clearing his throat. I swallowed a sigh as I responded, it's not 24, she's in her 24th. They are only 5 or 6 years apart. Doesn't that sound normal to you? I talked to her over video call the other day, and she seemed like a very sensible young lady. I ended the conversation with my in-laws and started preparing to leave at the venue. I should see Adam and my parents as well. I packed a beautiful outfit for the ceremony into my suitcase and meticulously checked for anything I might have forgotten from the living room. I could hear my mother-in-law loudly talking to my father-in-law. It will be refreshing to have her gone for a while. I felt the malice in her words on my back as I bet my lip getting angry now could provoke her to tamper with my carefully packed belongings. Better to endure until I leave the house. The next morning I pulled my slightly large suitcase and headed to the front door. Never come back. And while you're at it, why don't you just get a divorce and leave? Her words momentarily stopped me as I began walking towards the entrance again. I answered cheerfully, yes, as you wish. My voice was calmer than I expected. Maybe I'm more relieved by this situation than I realized. I had reached my limit of endurance long ago. Actually, I had been in touch with Daniel beforehand, steadily preparing for this day. Just stop with the nonsense and really do it soon. My mother-in-law scoffed, munching on snacks and laughing early in the morning. It's surprising how much she can eat just after waking up. I decided to walk to the station as I left the house. Before getting too far, I looked back at our familiar home and said with emotion, I really owe this house a lot. Except for my mother-in-law, I've been grateful to this home for a long time to my grandmother-in-law, my father-in-law. Daniel and Adam, I even feel indebted to the roof and the walls, but I can't recall ever needing my mother-in-law's help. Somehow, I feel incredibly lighthearted. I hurried to the place where my beloved family was waiting, pulling a slightly large suitcase behind me. I planned to stay at the hotel for 3 nights and 4 days. After that, I'm set to move into a new place where I can live alone. I met up with Daniel at my brother's wedding venue. We had planned this beforehand. The reason the wedding was scheduled at this time was so Daniel could be sure to attend. Hard day, huh? Got this for you, Daniel said with a lonely smile, pulling out divorce papers. His name hadn't been filled in yet. We were both going to sign it, mutually agreeing it would be our final joint task as a couple. Thanks, let's write it when we get back to the hotel. I booked a twin room. Hope that's okay, though it's sad for my brother getting married today. This is also a new beginning for us. I hope it's okay that our signing the divorce papers happens on the same day as the wedding. I won't announce it in front of everyone today, but we'll have to make it known later that we've divorced. Of course, a double would have been fine too. Thanks for booking, Daniel and I smiled affectionately at each other. No one could possibly imagine that in a few hours we'd be signing divorce papers. I marvel at how heavy a single piece of paper can feel. Filing this means we won't be husband and wife anymore after being together for over 31 years. Just one sheet is all it takes. I'm truly sorry, Daniel apologized, but I shook my head. Being with Daniel was always genuinely happy for me. I knew when I married him that he wouldn't be home much, and there was nothing I disliked about that. It was just his mother that I could never get along with. Don't apologize, you are a wonderful husband. Let's be good friends from now on, I said, with all the fondness I felt. Tearfully, Daniel took my hand. Thank you for everything, Daniel repeated, making me tear up as well. I secretly decided to attribute these tears to happiness for my brother's wedding. The next day, Daniel went back to his parents' home alone. He explained the situation to his in-laws. At first, my father-in-law was just shocked by the sudden mention of divorce, but when he understood the full story, he became furious. How dare you drive out someone who cared for my mother? Until the end, he shouted angrily, causing my mother-in-law to visibly panic. While I was primarily involved in caring for my grandmother-in-law, including the physically demanding tasks like bathing, my father-in-law, who had been strong since his youth, helped me. Towards the end, he also took care of turning our beaten grandmother in bed. In a way, my father-in-law and I were caregiving partners. However, my mother-in-law really hadn't helped with anything. It seems my father-in-law had been silently resentful about this. You've been terrible at housework ever since you married into the family. I kept quiet because you gave birth to our son, but you used my mother's leniency as an excuse to avoid helping out. You're nothing like Michelle, who did everything. His grievances escalated. My mother-in-law tried to retort when compared to me, but my father-in-law started speaking before she could get word in. It should have been you who left. To think we lost a hardworking daughter-in-law like that. Do you have any idea how much luxury Michelle's salary provided us? You haven't earned a single penny. Mentioning money put my mother-in-law in a weak position. She had never worked outside the home. The household expenses, including what my in-laws used, were covered by Daniel. Being a sailor, Daniel earned a good salary, and my in-laws converted all their pension into pocket money. Honestly, our family was wealthy. The cost related to the children or my grandmother-in-law care could actually be covered by Daniel's earnings. Yet I worked because working was fulfilling for me. That's why I had no problem using my earnings for the family. I gave trips and theater tickets to my in-laws, and for birthdays. I treated them to upscale dining. Truthfully, these gifts were also investments in securing some time for myself. It's not too late, Daniel. Go. Apologize now and ask Michelle to marry you again, my father-in-law finally said, realizing how precarious her position was. My mother-in-law was utterly distraught, but it was too late. She couldn't prevent the consequences of her actions from coming back to haunt her. This is the house I built you leave. My father-in-law, finally enraged, began to drive my mother-in-law out. Understandably, she resisted vehemently, screaming and scratching at her hair in frustration as she raised her voice in anger. She began clawing at her hair, repeating how frustrated she was. This sight was bizarre and apparently quite frightening. No, I understand that my words of encouragement weren't false. Daniel's job is admirable, being a sailor supporting people's lives by working in maritime shipping, sometimes away for years at a time. I think that's incredible. That's why I've been putting up with it. But I'm sorry for this time. I still like and respect you, but I just couldn't bear being family with your parents anymore. I finally managed to say the words that had been stuck in my chest for so long. Daniel looked a bit sad, but nodded in understanding. He didn't blindly side with his parents just because they were his family. He understood the situation fairly, which made me incredibly happy. I couldn't help but smile broadly, and Daniel looked at me as if dazzled. I only heard about what Daniel was feeling at that moment. Much later, he said he thought, "Oh, she's beautiful." Your smile was more radiant than ever before to me. At that moment, Daniel also seemed sweeter than ever before. Now, back to the story. The day after I met Daniel at the cafe, I met with his father. With Daniel's cooperation, it was time for the final act of my revenge. When Daniel's father arrived at the cafe, he was dressed a bit more stylishly than usual, since he was going out. After some small talk about the weather, I quickly brought up the main topic. I heard from Daniel that you're considering separating from your wife. It's fine while you're still healthy, but it'll be tough on your own later, right? Especially after all the commotion. If you really do decide to separate, I'm willing to help with caring for you in your later years. His father clearly looked pleased by this. Daniel's sister lived far away, and his son Daniel could be away for long periods at sea. He had never been one to do much around the house, like cooking, cleaning, or laundry. He would surely appreciate my help, having taken care of his mother until the end. Of course, I'll separate from her. No, wait, maybe it's better to divorce, he said, furrowing his brow and crossing his arms. I was hoping that my almost certainly ousted mother-in-law would go from almost to definitely ousted, but it seemed the situation was developing even more unfavorably for her. If I suddenly dropped dead, she'd probably make a big fuss. Wouldn't she? Better to divorce her properly before that. That's definitely better, he continued. Daniel looked as if he wanted to say, "Here we go again," as his father began speaking more decisively. His father has a tendency to act swiftly. Once he's made up his mind, sometimes he even goes a bit too far, but that's just his nature. Knowing this, I felt a sense of satisfaction as the situation unfolded. I nodded in agreement with a grin. You really do think things through. I'm impressed by your foresight, I said, knowing how to handle him after living with him for so many years. Pushing him a little like this would likely lead him to actually do it. Daniel chuckled, sensing my intentions, but chose not to stop me. He was probably more angered by my mother-in-law's behavior than I was. His father, energized, stood up to go get the divorce papers. Right then, out of kindness, I decided to introduce the lawyer, Daniel, and I consulted for Our divorce to help my father-in-law from that day on my father-in-law began actively pursuing. The divorce, it was clear that my mother-in-law was destined for a lonely life. 2 weeks later, I returned to what was once my familiar home, now just my former in-laws' house, to collect the belongings I hadn't been able to take with me. Before I had taken all the valuables, but it was impossible to take. Everything clothes, books, photos filled, with memories, drawings by my son when he was little, and bedding and furniture I bought with my own salary over the years. I had accumulated many personal items in that house. This visit turned out to be the last time I would see my mother-in-law. By then her divorce had been decided, and she was visibly panicking as I went to collect my belongings. She began to kneel before me, her face pale as she started apologizing. "Michelle, please forgive me. I beg you, it was all just a joke. Please come back and convince your husband I completely ignored her and continued packing after. Continuing to grovel, my mother-in-law stood up abruptly. It seemed she was upset at being ignored. She began to hurl vile insults at me, again reverting to her old ways. "This woman, how dare you when I'm being so humble? You've been nothing but trouble since you married into this family. Just leave and die alone miserably," she shouted, adding more simpler yet unrepeatable insults. I continued to ignore her and packed the items into a cardboard box. Suddenly she screamed and lunged at the box. Taken aback, I dodged, and she ended up overturning the box that contained neatly folded clothes. The clothes were scattered all over the floor. She then began stomping on and kicking the clothes, like throwing a tantrum. "Enough already," Daniel shouted and glared at her, standing tall, his mother usually hearing only compliance from her obedient son. Froze as if it were the end of the world. I held back Daniel with one hand and turned an emotionless face towards my mother-in-law. "I am no longer your daughter-in-law. You are no longer my mother-in-law. Our relationship is completely over. Thank you for nothing. I was helped by your mother and father-in-law and your husband." I swiftly stepped around the scattered clothes. Without bothering to fold them again, I just stuffed them into the box and lifted it up. "Don't touch my things, stranger." Goodbye. I tossed those final words at the disheveled mother-in-law and quickly left the room. I had no desire to share space with that woman any longer. I called Daniel to take care of the rest of the belongings. I got into the car driven by my brother and waited as he prepared to leave. I could still hear my mother-in-law shrieking from inside the house, but listening to her was a waste of time. After we left, I heard she continued to beat her own head and wailed terribly. As far as I was concerned, there was never a chance for reconciliation, but it seemed she deeply regretted cutting off her last hope. But her regrets were too late to matter to anyone. About a month later, my mother-in-law was finally evicted from the house and began living alone in a modest place. Daniel occasionally visits his mother to check on her well-being, as does his sister. I've heard that my mother-in-law now lives in her old clothes, substituting them for pajamas, and doesn't even bother to take a shower regularly. Apart from shopping, she hardly goes outside, spending her days eating fast food and budget snacks while lamenting her impoverished life. Apparently she did split some assets with my father-in-law during the divorce, but sadly it wasn't a significant amount, and she's living with financial insecurity in her old age. I don't know about my sister, but I'm not giving her any support. That's obvious, right? Daniel told me this with a shrug. As a well-paid sailor, Daniel was always a source of pride for his mother. She never expected to be completely cut off by her own son. All this was because she constantly disregarded me, the wife her son chose. And yet the irony is that she herself had said never come back and just get a divorce. And leave now she's the one who can't ever come back. It's exactly like the saying, curses return. Upon the heads of those that curse she should have been prepared to face her own misfortunes if she wished on others. 5 years after the divorce, I'm enjoying a peaceful life alone with my cat in an apartment about a 25-minute drive from what used to be my in-laws' home. I found this place after looking for somewhere convenient for commuting to work. The rental is pet-friendly and welcomes animals. It's a lovely place with good sunlight. I still visit my former father-in-law's home once a week to cook him various dishes. Our relationship has improved since the divorce. My sister-in-law, who lives far away, can hardly look me in the eye, given how much I still help out Daniel, and I still keep in touch. In fact, when he returns from his long sea voyages, we make sure to go on dates. It's almost like we're courting each other, and we go to movies, visit museums, and despite being somewhat new at this, our relationship feels fresh and exciting. We spend hours on the phone and exchange messages, finding it surprisingly enjoyable. Adam, who visits us on his days off, jokes about our fake divorce, saying, "You two just went back to being lovers, didn't you?" But the truth is, Daniel and I never were lovers before. Our marriage was arranged, and we never really had a period of romance. So now it's like I'm building a romantic relationship with him for the first time. We even have a secret PCT if we ever find ourselves completely free from having to deal with his mother, whether she passes away, moves in with his sister, or goes into a facility. Then we remar. Daniel suggests that this would be when no more welfare checks on his mother are necessary. Discussions about whether his sister and her husband will start living with her or place her in a facility have already begun. Our reunion might not be so far off after all, after more than 31 years together and now nearing our 55s. It feels somewhat embarrassing to talk about this, but I'm thrilled at the prospect of experiencing true love with Daniel, whom I've always cared for deeply.